Sorry about that. I had to stop the tape. And this is part two of part five. There is a charming description of Voltaire of a discussion among Louis XV and a group of courtiers, which reveals the practical nature of the encyclopedia. I should mention that the encyclopedia had friends at court, who used their influence as often as possible in behalf of Deirdre and his co-workers, on the occasion of which Voltaire tells there was a dispute as to how gunpowder was made, and one of the courtiers remarked how strange it was that there was so much killing in hunting and in wars without anyone being aware of precisely how the killing was done. A lady of the court commented that she would like to know how her rouge was made. The Duc de la Valliere remarked that it was a pity the king had caused all of their encyclopedias to be confiscated, as in this work they could find the information they desired. The king defended himself. He had been told the work was dangerous, and he wanted to judge for himself before letting it circulate freely. But he sent 3 lackeys to bring in the encyclopedia, and when they returned, each carrying 7 of the large volumes, the facts about gunpowder and rouge were ascertained without difficulty. You can see how far removed was Deirdre from the pedantry, the passionless pursuit of passionless intelligence, that I referred to a while ago. He was one of the most thoroughly human scholars who ever lived. There is a passage in one of Deirdre's articles that expresses this so forcibly, and that is so true and noble, and that I must read to you. One consideration especially that we ought never to lose from sight is that if we ever banish a man, or the thinking and contemplative being, from above the surface of the earth, this pathetic and sublime spectacle of nature becomes no more than a scene of melancholy and silence. The universe is dumb. The darkness and silence of the night take possession of it. It is the presence of man that gives its interest to the existence of other beings. And what better object can we set before ourselves in the history of these beings than to accept such a consideration? Why shall we not introduce man into our work in the same place which he holds in the universe? Why shall we not make him a common center? Is there in infinite space any other point from which we can with greater advantage draw these immense lines that we purpose to extend to all other points? What a vivid and softening reaction must result between man and the beings by whom he is surrounded! Man is the single term from which we ought to set out, and to which we ought to trace all back. If we would please interest touch even in the most arid reflections and the driest details. If you take away my own existence and the happiness of my fellows, of what concern to me is all the rest of nature? The encyclopedia served its purpose, and now has only a historical interest. It had its defects. It must be remembered that this was the first great organization of human knowledge, though the encyclopedia idea, in various forms, had been put to use before, but none had essayed the gigantic task that Deirdre set for himself. Today we have encyclopedias aplenty, and numerous repositories of technical knowledge. I would not leave the impression that the encyclopedia was totally devoid of propaganda. This could not well have been. In view of the intense hostility between the Church and the new group of thinkers, a hostility that was necessarily personal in a great degree, as the Church could and did punish those who disputed its doctrines and its rule. Its influence in the state was powerful. It did not hesitate to have its enemies thrown into prison. Deirdre and his co-workers were constantly harassed by the authorities set upon them by the Church. On 2 occasions work on the encyclopedia was suspended as the result of this persecution. This being the situation, it is small wonder that the encyclopedia had some spirited passages of propaganda. Nowadays there are not the tremendous and cruel obstacles to the dissemination of knowledge that existed in Deirdre's time. There are forces today that are animated by the hate and fear of knowledge, and that fight insidiously against the spread of knowledge. But neither church nor state has the actual physical power over the lives and thoughts of men that these institutions, closely allied, possessed in the 18th century. It would be hard to estimate the influence of the encyclopedia. We do know, however, that it rested under one serious disadvantage. Its influence was confined to the nobility, to the wealthy class. It was not read by the common people. The 28 volumes of the encyclopedia, there were 11 volumes of plates, sold for a little more than $200. On the other hand, observe how great are the advantages of the little blue books in the popular spreading of culture. They are read by all classes. They are within easy reach of the poorest man. Moreover, there is a marked incentive to reading. New readers are made. Those who have read little now read much. From many angles it can be seen that the striking ease with which the little blue books can be obtained acts as a stimulus, that it creates as well as satisfies the desire for reading. They are not the kind of books that are left unread. To have them is to read them. They can be slipped into a pocket, read anywhere and under any circumstances, and are ideal companions for a journey. They are time savers, a fact that is important in this age of hurry. A man need not spend several days reading about the age of Shakespeare or Addison. He can get the rich, significant material, the heart and essence of these periods in a couple of hours. This statement has an air of exaggeration, and it does require a qualifying word. Of course, I realize that a man could read many books about a period and still not thoroughly know the period, and if he should read everything that has been written about it, still he would not know it. Still he would not know it as he would had he actually lived it. But I am speaking relatively, with human limitations in mind. It is time that a period can be vitally illuminated if a writer knows how to choose his material and has the art of packing brevity to the full. Just as the drama, by showing us a man's life at a single critical point, can vitally illuminate the man's character and destiny. For example, how vividly does William Morris, in A Dream of John Ball, picture the English common life in the 14th century, and so does Finger in his sketch of England in Shakespeare's time. By describing a typical scene at the play, throw a high light upon the life and manners of the period. If a man is eager for a knowledge of science, if he wishes to know the story of the evolution of the human race, it is not necessary for him to wade through many volumes written in difficult technical language. The story is very simple, yet fully and authentically told in the little blue books. And here's a picture of Haldeman Julius. You don't get to see this very often, so there is the man studying. See if you can get a good look at him. Kind of blurry, I know, but that's the gentleman Haldeman Julius. Okay, back to the story. I stress the fact that this knowledge is complete as to essentials. It is not fragmentary, a thing of extracts, a mere smattering of information. Books like The Building of the Earth or The Stoic Philosophy of England in Shakespeare's time have unity and breadth, and they cover faithfully the whole of their subjects. I do not mean to say that the devoted and diligent scholar will stop with these books, that they contain all that is to be said about their subjects. One can read many books on these subjects, whole libraries of them. In fact, but the average reader who wishes to be broadly and soundly informed with as little reading as possible, who, in short, would cover many fields in few books, can achieve this object through the little blue books. Any man, for example, who has read Gilbert Murray's admirable essay on the Stoic philosophy can take an intelligent part in the discussion of this way of thinking about life. Today, the man who has read the more than 500 titles in the Little Blue Book series can truthfully call himself well read, and the full extent of the usefulness of the Little Blue Books can be grasped only when one considers their continuous growth. 1,000 or 5,000 titles will more abundantly justify the educational promise of the series. It is obvious that I have not yet accomplished my whole purpose, else I should let the series stand at its present place. As one can never say that education is complete, so I shall never be ready to say that my work is finished. I see in the little blue books a kindred spirit to that which moved Deirdre and his fellows in preparing their immense encyclopedia. This was a work of 20 years. The little blue books have only 5 years behind them. Think what they will be in 20 years. Deirdre had the idea, a remarkable and indeed revolutionary idea at that time, that knowledge was the true and powerful factor, not only in the development of the individual, but in the progress of society. This is not to blink the importance of those physical and economic forces that influence men, but without knowledge men are the victims of these forces, just as men are at the mercy of nature unless they understand and see intelligently the forces of nature. Whatever view one may take on the oft disputed question of the causes of things, man's intellectual activity can be separated from man's progress. No, sorry, cannot be separated from man's progress. Certainly Deirdre realized this clearly enough. He wished to affect men's minds. As we have seen, man as a thinking animal was to him the central fact in life. He essayed this task in the broadest, the sanest, the most effective manner. It was his aim to impact to men all that could be definitely known about life, its principles and processes. In his day, he saw that if man could understand life as it really was, if they could know things, they would be less easily taken in by prejudice, more ready to view all ideas and theories with minds tolerant, to choose fairly, and able to choose wisely. Tolerance was the chief word of the thinkers of the 18th century. It was the motive back of the writings of Voltaire. Deirdre had it ever in plain view. Deirdre's theory, if theory it can be called, was that man should study life to improve it. While there is much theorizing in the encyclopedia and weighty attacks upon particular doctrines, it is a narrow and false view to see Deirdre as a propagandist. A mere propagandist would not have conceived the plan of bringing together in a single, coordinated body the various elements of human knowledge, and this was the chief and active principle of the encyclopedia. And it must be kept in mind that when Deirdre and the other contributors to the encyclopedia turned their guns upon certain theories, it was because these theories were obstacles to human progress, and the dissemination of knowledge, insofar as they humanly could, they wished to dispute theories by facts. Now I am often asked if I had a propaganda purpose in the little blue books. Our age has grown so accustomed to propaganda that men find it hard to thinking of any other motive for seeking public attention, and especially for the circulation of the printed word. If it's in print, it's propaganda, seems to be the worldly wise motto. There is much justification for this view, but to use a common expression, I have nothing up my sleeve. In publishing the little blue books, that is to say, I am not insidiously furthering the designs of any particular theory or movement. That the little blue books will have a broad social as well as individual influence, that they will have their important reaction upon the features of our common life, I am far from denying. If they did not have this influence, I should not consider them as useful and vital as I do. But such influence proceeds from knowledge, not from propaganda, from thinking, civilized minds, viewing life widely and intelligently, not from minds narrowly propelled by a single theory. The worst foes of a free and ordered and progressive life, today as in the past, are ignorance and intolerance. And intolerance is the direct product of ignorance. The man who is familiar with the history of human thought, the man whose mind is equipped with an active and various knowledge of life, is distinguished by his tolerance. He examines all ideas, fearlessly and impartially. He hates, above all, the spirit that would suppress or destroy ideas, that would confine and stultify the human mind. I believe that every man should know the history of man, the ways by which the race has come to its present stage in the long journey of life. He should know the story of the greatness and the littleness of man, his defeats and victories, his trials and errors, his pitiful ordinary struggles, and his sublime extraordinary achievements. He should see man struggling in the depths and man scaling the heights. Everything is knowledge. Everything in knowledge really comes under the head of this history of man. As Deirdre saw it, man is the common center. Literature, science, philosophy, all is the history of man. Literature records the aspirations, the thoughts, the cultural growth of man. Through it, man has revealed himself at every point, in every period, of his development. Philosophy is the record of man's efforts to solve the mystery of life and to evolve general principles of living. Science is the record of man's slow and infinitely patient assembling of the facts of life, of his gradual emergence as the real Lord of life, standing in orderly relation to life. It is only when one knows this history of man that one can have individually a full and well-rounded life and relate oneself effectively to the forces of life in one's own time. It is this kind of culture, the kind of culture that produces what Whitman called great persons with robust souls, that I wish to promote. The world needs open minds, minds that can embrace all theories, but prefer a grain of knowledge to a whole field of theory. I do not scorn theories. They are tools of thought, and in proportion to their influence upon man's thinking, they should be placed in the record. But they should be represented in the finest critical or historical or artistic spirit. After all, the great virtue of the little blue books is that they make knowledge a living and human thing. Place it among the realities of life. Ideas are valueless until they are communicated from mind to mind. And the more minds they touch and vitalize, the greater is the value of ideas. Knowledge that is shut up in the schools and libraries, and that is the special pursuit of professional scholars, will not produce very lively results in the scheme of things. It must be put into circulation, flung upon the four winds, dispatched upon a mission of real culture into the highways and byways of life. It is only through this general circulation of knowledge that life can be protected from the mass ignorance and individual self-scheming. This senseless warfare upon the teaching of evolutionary science, would it be possible that people generally were equipped with the scientific knowledge that belongs to this day and age? It is not enough that certain things are known to a few men. They must be generally known. Every age has had its scholars, who were in the advance of the general intelligence. But what we demand is a higher level of general intelligence, a society of really civilized men and women. I believe that the little blue books are accomplishing this splendid purpose. If the enormous circulation of these books is not proof enough, you have only to see the mass of my daily correspondence. You have seen it, and you know that I receive letters full of acute and vigorous discussion of men and books and ideas, of historical and scientific and philosophic questions. Letters that reveal minds eager and alive, animated by a most healthy spirit of criticism and inquiry. Such discussions have been known in little groups. Alas, what sadly limited groups! But what a difference! What a tremendous and inspiring difference! When you get thousands of people, of all sorts and conditions, and separated by thousands of miles, in the habit of discussing vital things in a vital way, this means that a new force, intellectual and artistic, is abroad in the land. It is the growth of this force that I regard as the true criticism of the growth of the little blue books. Criterion. As the true criterion of the growth of the little blue books. I had an example of this growth of intelligent discussion, this newly awakened interest in larger subjects. On a recent journey, smoking car conversation is not usually on a very high level, As any traveler will testify, anyone knows the most popular topics: sports, the latest scandals, trifling remarks on the weather, a skimming of the surface of business and politics. On the occasion of which I speak, there was a new note. Some mention was made of evolution and the wave of blatant prejudice against all that is ignorantly grouped under the name of Darwinism. One man, a clerk in a city office, as I found out later, spoke briefly in defense of the evolutionary concept of life. Then he dived from his traveling bag and brought forth several of the little blue books: A History of Evolution, 3 lectures on evolution, Reflections on Modern Science, and a half-dozen others. He handed them out, explained that he always passed these little blue books on to others after he had read them. Immediately 2 others, a lawyer and a mechanic, mentioned that they were readers of these little books. The lawyer said that he always had a pile of them on his desk to be read in his odd moments of leisure. The working man had several of the little books in a coat pocket. One of them, I remember, was the tragic story of Oscar Wilde's life. This led to a discussion of heredity, of the relation of art to morality, and of whether Wilde was to be considered as a thinker or a witty commentator on life. There was a spirited exchange of views regarding the extent of Wilde's artistic debt to Whistler. On the whole, as you can see, this was a smoking car talk that was remarkable. This was a small occasion, to be sure, but the significance of it, that this is the sort of talk that is more and more to be heard wherever one goes. It is proof, which anyone can gather by a little observation, that Haldeman Julius is correct when he says that the little blue books are bringing knowledge out of the libraries and into the lives of men. And that is the end of E. Haldeman Julius, The Man and His Work, Little Blue Book number 678, written by John W. Gunn, copyright 1924. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next Little Blue Book.